City Council meeting, October 17th, 2017.
This special meeting to order. There are several purposes of tonight's meeting. There's really two purposes. The first is to share information from our staff to the public, those here in this room and through the media, our citizens, about what's going on in the bond project, our timetable, where we stand, budget issues, and so on. The second purpose is for council to hear this, debate among ourselves, and give direction back to staff and or to the bond commission as appropriate. What this isn't is a public hearing. Unlike several public hearings where people come and speak to council, other than staff, we will not be doing that kind of meeting. It's not a public hearing. With that, Mr. Wood, I'll turn it to you, sir.
Thank you. Mayor Klein, members of City Council, Mr. Crone. The good news is tonight you're going to hear numbers from Assistant Manager and Chief Financial Officer Rodney Miller on the bond program on the $40 million, and we are within budget on that. Some of the numbers have changed globally within the $40 million. And in addition to that, Rodney's going to talk about, we've also been able to take the $40 million and leverage that against some, as match for grant funding, and over $15 million and hopefully counting in grant funding that we've received to go along with that. The way we stay within budget is for City Council to direct staff, our designers, and the Bond Commission to stay within budget. And so you're going to see some recommended numbers for each of the projects tonight or this afternoon, and we would like either through action or just general direction from City Council at the end of this with these recommended numbers to say you need to design to this, and if cuts are to be made, the Bond Commission would consider what cuts would need to be made in order to stay within budget once we get the bids in, and then make that recommendation back to City Council. It gets very complicated because with the grant funding, the grant funding are tied to specific elements within each project. So it's not something, the grant money is not icing in that you can go take that and do something else with it. You have to do with that what you requested through the grant application process. So, if we reach a point with one of the let's say with City Walk where we have to make some cuts, we need to be, the Bond Commission and staff and our engineering and design folks need to be careful that we don't cut something that would eliminate grant funding that we have previously received, if that makes sense. So
could those be identified right out the bat with the commission so they could go ahead and have that in their mind of what is tied together that they can't cut?
Some of it can be, yes. And then we can also, through the bidding process, we can also do some alternate, we can have a comprehensive bid, but also identify some alternates that it becomes a little bit easier to cut if it came to that. So there's some ways we can navigate through this, but we do need to stay within the $40 million. I think 35 and a half of it relates to everything except the business, the 1764. So in addition to that, so in that we feel good about where we are with the numbers. And the next step will be Freese and Nichols is going to be working on a detailed bond program schedule to keep us on task as far as moving through this in an efficient way from a scheduling perspective. So that'll be the next thing that comes from that. And just as a side note, and additionally, we're starting to see, and we hoped that this would be created, and it has been, some energy from the development community and some interest in doing some private sector projects along some of these bond program projects, and so that's going to be very exciting. That's where we expect to really hope to move the needle from a tax base perspective specifically. So with that, I'd like to ask Rodney Miller, unless there's any questions, to come forward and go through this. And as we go through it, please feel free to stop and ask questions or make comments as we go through.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of Council, Mr. Crone, and members of the audience who are not used to hearing from me, but hearing from the other assistant manager. But something happened a couple weeks ago, and that we won't talk about right now. We'll talk about an hour or two, right? So this evening, or this afternoon and the evening, I'll talk to you about the financial update for our bond projects. Let me first start with a little brief history of the bond program. and audience members. I know many of you participated in this, as well as staff. We started with an Aspiring Spaces plan, which goes back to 2012. And this is a little hard to read, but this identified 9 different streetscapes and 5 different gateways that needed to be enhanced and or created as major entryways into our city. And from that, which was really the genesis of the program, we had also, in essence, placemaking elements of the project, which I'll go into, which actually formed our our $40 million bond program. In November of 2014, the voters approved 2 bond orders, and that's important. So they're actually ordering us to issue this debt in 2 different buckets, if you will. A $25 million component which relates to transportation, and $15 million that relates to economic development. And we have worked with our bond counsel, Parker Poe and Scott Leo, who has presented, who was actually here in 2014, walking the city through the process. In fact, I had a meeting with him last week to let him know where we are. We will navigate with him to make sure that each of the elements, as Mr. Wood was talking about, related to grants, related to streetscape, is it transportation, is it economic development, he will walk us through that process for each of the projects to make sure that they fall under transportation or economic development. We also embarked on our Park 1764 and a design and marketing campaign by the Economic Development Corporation. Mayor Klein and Councilman Lael is part of a subcommittee on the Park 1764 project in conjunction with Randy Eisenhower and Barbara Beatty from the Catawba County Board of Commissioners, as well as Mr. Wood and Mr. Berry, County Manager and City Manager on that project, on that team, as well as Scott Millar. So that group has met, and I've got a slide talking about that project as well. 42-member bond commission was formed in early 2015. Many of the members are behind me in the audience today. We created 3 different subcommittees, Riverwalk, City Walk, and Streetscapes and Gateways subcommittees. And they have been meeting periodically since that time. This was the overall map that was created by Freeze Nichols. Basically, this talks to transportation, if you will. Here's I-40 and Lenoir-Rhyne Boulevard. This was one of the gateways that they had envisioned. Going north, here's Lenoir-Rhyne in the beginning of City Walk in the yellow. Goes through town. You hit this green streetscape, which then goes north to connect to Old Lenoir Road. Here is the north connection, which connects to Riverwalk. You've also got a Highway 321 gateway sitting over here as well. So those were the projects, and I know you can't read this, but many of us have seen this before. It lists all the project on this right portion of the slide, breaking out $35.55 million right here at the bottom for those bond projects. The balance, as I'll show you in a moment, of the $40 million is, as Mr. Wood said, towards Park 1764. This option, as a reminder, was our combined option A after a bunch of deliberation between bond commission members and city council. So the approved projects and the cost estimates at that time are listed down the left-hand side, and the dollar amounts for each. And those elements are in this first bond package of $40 million. So let's speak to City Walk. The original City Walk concept was a corridor, greenway, down Main Avenue from Lenoir-Rhyne University through downtown Hickory. It was about 1.2 miles of walking and biking space. We were hopeful that it would create opportunities, which it has, for business headquarters, urban residential units, retail, and commercial services. It would be a greenway through or along Main Avenue and have various pocket parks and connect to certain parks within the city. Here is a drawing from our consultant, AMEC Foster Wheeler, which is a 60% design drawing, which shows their 60% concept for Union Square. And in essence, if you envision the city, let me back up. The railroad right-of-way is here in gray, with the two black lines designating the boundary of that railroad right-of-way that Norfolk Southern governs. This would be the City Walk itself, and you see it branches off and goes to the storefront of Union Square as well, crosses the 3rd Street Bridge, and keeps on going west. The City Walk Subcommittee will be meeting next week, Thursday. Next Thursday to hear and receive all of the 60% design drawings and to discuss the elements that AMEC Foster Wheeler has come up with. So a sneak peek. This is the 127 bridge that AMEC Foster and Wheeler has come up with, a conceptual design. 60 feet high. We really wanted, and we heard from Bond Commission members, they really wanted an iconic bridge, something to say Hickory, and I think certainly this design signifies that. The original estimate of City Walk was $15.1 million. As was alluded to earlier, one of the grants that we received, that I'll follow up in just a moment, from NCDOT, actually extends City Walk from 4th Street to 9th Street. However, that section has not been designed yet. So you will be seeing in a future council agenda a design change to include 4th through 9th so AMEC can design that portion of City Walk. We have estimated the cost to construct that based on the other cost estimates as of $1 million. So that would be $1 million increase over and above the original $15.1 million cost estimate. The bridge I just showed you on the prior slide would be an additional $1 million on top of what was originally planned in the scope of work. So if you add those two together, you get it $17 million, and their revised cost estimates at 60% design completion is $18.86 million. And that number does include 20% for contingency and for inspections. The good news to that number is it decreases by $11.3 million, which is a combination of two grants combined into one, of new money, $11,280,000, which reduces that $18.86 to a total amount that city bond funds would be used of $7,581,641. So that would be the revised bond issuance for City Walk. Let me switch to Riverwalk. The Riverwalk concept is a 3-mile waterfront trail system along Lake Hickory through Rotary Geithner Park, under the new 321 bridge that DOT will be constructing, and meandering up in the future, we hope, to Hickory Crawdad Stadium, L.P. Friends Stadium. We would create and connect retail space, recreational and entertainment options for the public, residential perhaps, as well as pedestrian and bike access along Riverwalk. There's a big effort of coordinating with regulatory agencies, FERC and DEQ, the two primary agencies that we have to work with. So Design Workshop, our designer, has sent us a memo with some challenges that they see related to Riverwalk. And I've got a couple of pictures to back up some of their findings. The topography of that site of where Riverwalk was originally designed or planned for, the original design, if you remember, was an option 2. There was an option 1, which was all along the waterfront. There was option 2, which basically did a 50-50 split between all along the water and upland, 30, 50 feet, depending on where they could find the best place for the path. So after surveying and after doing some geotechnical borings, they have found that in many areas there's a greater than a 2-to-1 slope, which is a steep slope. There's also rock, that is a considerable amount of rock out on the site, which would require some blasting and some drilling to get through it. In their memo, they questioned the constructability of the Riverwalk. Because of its width, 10 to 12 foot path, you'd have to put retaining walls on both the upper and lower ends, which is the cut and fill sides of the proposed path. They also raised a concern about access to the site. They would need to start at the water treatment plant side, put in an access road and grade through the woods to be able to put soil borings in there, and they're concerned about environmental concerns. They need more geotechnical and/or borings to do some additional investigative work as to where the path could actually go, if possible. That concern brought up the fact that you're going to disturb vegetation and degrade that slope stability and potentially cause erosion problems into the lake. And then finally, we originally envisioned that whole path to be ADA accessible, and they have significant concerns about making that ADA accessible the full length of Riverwalk. Here's a couple of pictures of what they saw. A significant amount of rock from the shoreline up the hill, and you can start to see the slope. The second picture is even more. You can see that's basically straight down there. So that's definitely more than a 2-to-1 slope on that particular part of the proposed Riverwalk. So the designers have recommended that we stay all along the water in basically a bridge concept from one end to the other, which negates the need to deal with that rock, the slope, the environmental concerns associated with that.
Hey, can I say
Yes,
one?
sir.
Just out of an abundance of caution, Rodney went through a number of things that the firm felt like would be hurdles in this, but we would like to, or I would like to recommend that we look at that a little more closely. I'd like to see some numbers to some degree on what the difference in the cost would be, just so we would, not that we would change it, just so we would have it and understand what that difference is. If City Council were okay with that, but we will proceed forward with where we're going, but I just want to make sure that is indeed the case.
Yeah, I'd be supportive of that. Given a couple, first of all, I think we have to, I think this is a city council and a policy decision. You said we made the decision that the path would be ADA accessible. I don't recall council throughout the length of it. Now, clearly, we need to have ADA accessible elements to the path. I don't think it's a requirement that the entire path be ADA accessible. By way of example, the Greenway at Hickory City Park is not ADA compliant. It's certainly steeper in many locations. So I think that's a decision that City Council, with the Bond Commission's help, would need to make. You're looking at ADA means you're looking at over a mile at less than a 1 in 12 slope. So, yeah, to do that on land would be extremely expensive. But if that's not something, if we decide, well, a level path is not necessarily the best experience for people using the Riverwalk. In other words, a path that curves, meanders, might come up, come down. And I'm not talking about severe grades, but gentle grades that could give vistas on some of the, like if you'll back up, yeah, those are great examples of a path, a walk maybe on top of those rocks, looking out over the lake. So I think it probably is a good idea to at least ask them to examine what it might mean to do both, rather than to completely discount based on the challenges that I see that they've outlined in here.
Good point, Mr. Lale. I think
Also, where would they run into the problems? Because if you're going to say you don't require it being all ADA, is only the first 20 feet going to be ADA and then it's up? So we need to make sure that the experience, if we're going to say it doesn't all need to be ADA, then there needs to be enough of an experience from point A to point
Absolutely.
Z
Like
to
the
make it
Rosales
right.
Bridge most definitely, in my opinion, would need to be completely ADA compliant. And maybe some areas that connect in around the Boy Scout hut, or the area that might connect to a future Lackey Park. Yeah, that certainly. But there's a lot of area there that it might be interesting that if you're partially on, partially off the water, if it's not too expensive. That's what I'm constructability on land versus constructing a bridge on the water, I mean, I can't understand how it's more difficult to construct on land than it is on a barge to build a bridge in water, so.
So, yeah, I would go along with getting some
Yeah.
more numbers.
So just so I'm abundantly clear, the official position of city council is right now that it's on the water. But we're going to take a look, just to be completely thorough, because one of the other things that's changed is the state recently changed the riparian buffer rules to our favor. So that's another consideration that may bring some costs down that we need to look at least. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, that's good.
Mr. Lael, Ms. Patton, thank you for those comments. And I'd echo, there is no requirement that we know of to put that completely as ADA accessible. I think conceptually, that was what we had envisioned when we sent that to the designer, for them to design an ADA accessible path, hence their concerns they've now raised.
Sure.
Right.
I mean, it would be nice to have the whole thing accessible to all the citizens.
I don't disagree, and we can
Yeah.
have further discussion on this maybe at a later date. But it's I do think for the people using it, the experience is important, and a flat experience throughout the whole thing may not be the most interesting.
But even if it's on the water, it doesn't have to be flat for the whole distance necessarily.
No, it wouldn't have to be. I mean, you could certainly raise your bridge and lower your bridge. Yeah.
And to your final point, then we have reacted to the memo they've sent, and we are asking them for
Okay.
additional questions or
Good.
additional questions they
Good.
need to answer, i.e. what's the soil boring results that they've got, where are those, what do they look like? So we're going to ask them some additional information.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
So this drawing would be, envisions the boardwalk, if you will, all across or all along the water. To your point, Mr. Lael, there are two spurs currently contemplated to go up to the Boy Scout cabin. And then this would be a spur that would get you back to Geithner Rotary Park and/or Lackey Park if that gets constructed. So that's one drawing of what that might look like. Here's a drawing that the designers have given us of what that bridge could look like, and this would be more of an iconic bridge structure a little further out into the water. As you mentioned, Rosales, which is the design engineer on the team, who has designed the Liberty Bridge in Greenville, South Carolina. This is a concept that he has come up with, and he will be discussing, he and the team will be discussing with the Riverwalk Subcommittee next week as well on these drawings and additional drawings. So the original estimate that was planned in the bond package, I mentioned option 2, which was a land-water combination, was estimated at $8.5 million last year. Option 1, by the way, all along the waterfront, was estimated at $12.5 million. And Bond Commission and City Council ultimately were in agreement, though it was a close 1 and 2, to put it all on land and water for that experience, and also partly to do with the cost at the time. So the $8.5 million option 2 option was selected. What the latest design envisions is, as I mentioned, a structure that's supported completely over the water that follows the shoreline. They have estimated a $1 million addition to maximize the experience for our citizens, to increase the trail width to a 12-foot section all through the Riverwalk, which would add an additional $1 million to the price tag. And as the previous drawing from Mr. Rosales, that vertical bridge element, this would be constructed on the first 750 feet of the Riverwalk, coming from 321 and going east. This component would be an additional $1 million added to the budget as well. So their revised estimate, after 25% design, is $16.3 million, which includes a 20% amount for construction contingency and inspections. Yes, did you have a comment?
Have we contacted FERC or DEQ relative to, and Duke, that we can actually build something like this?
The original concept has been discussed with Duke, not with FERC, but with Duke. Did it envision Rosales' design as well? And it envisioned Rosales' design, yeah.
That is
As a reminder-
quite iconic.
As a reminder, the Duke and the Water Remanagement Group, they will provide a recommendation to FERC for their
Okay.
approval. And that could take 6 months to a year for that approval, correct?
All right, thank you.
Mr. Miller, go back, the 16 million, that is all waterfront?
Yes, sir.
When we say, and just to clarify, when we say waterfront, it's a bridge over the water.
It is a
We're talking
bridge.
about concrete casings in the lake bed supported by steel spans and synthetic lumber.
With, I don't know about synthetic lumber, but.
Didn't we talk
Oh,
about some
the
sort of
iPad,
special lumber?
iPad, yes.
Yeah, David knows.
Yeah,
That's what we-
yeah.
What, is it synthetic?
No, it's real wood.
It's Brazilian birch or something?
Yeah, Brazilian ebony.
Ebony,
It's
okay,
almost
yeah.
an ebony. It's very, very hard, very durable, last our lifetime.
Okay.
But yes, it would be a bridge structure.
Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. The younger lifetime.
Can we get a warranty on that?
Okay,
You digress.
okay, I digress.
Yes, sir, it would be a bridge structure supported by footings.
Right,
yes.
right, it's support, yeah.
In January, we are applying for grant funds for this project. We were not prepared design-wise last year to submit a grant application for this because we were not far enough in the design. As a matter of information, this same grant is the one we're applying for that we received for City Walk. So we feel pretty good about our chances about getting some additional grant funds for Riverwalk like we did with City Walk. And we will be applying for those funds in January of next year. Streetscapes and gateways, that concept, as I showed you on the first slide, improving and redefining entrances to the city, adds curb appeal to Hickory and beneficial to travelers and residents on our roadways and gateways. We want to encourage pedestrian access and encourage private investment. Our gateways, there were 5 on that first slide. 3 of those 5 were planned for in this first phase, i.e. the $40 million bond program. Don't think I have that, but it would be gateways 1, 2, and 4. And we have since combined gateways 1 and 4 into one project. The gateway at 321 and Clement, because of the 321 bridge design, road design, we have foregone that particular gateway and combined those dollars into the 321 and 70 gateway. The final gateway would be number 2, I-40 and Lenore Ryan Boulevard, estimated at $500,000. That's still in our bond package. For streetscapes, there are 4 streetscapes of the 9 that are planned in the first phase. And most recently, we did receive another grant, a little over $3.5 million to fund Old Lenore Road and that streetscape. So we're excited about that. That's 80% of that $4.4 million project price tag, which equals the $3.5 million. And then the final project to round out our $40 million is Park 1764, Class A Business Park. We have bond funds of $4.45 million that we have allocated to that project. As a reminder, it is a 50-50 partnership with Catawba County. We currently have an option, which we have now, on 170 acres, we have now exercised that option, and we have purchased city and county 7.5 acres of that particular site that we are embarking on an access road, a sewer line, some landscaping, a berm, some grading, so that we can have an entrance into the park so that future developers can come and take a look at that. We also received a grant that you'll see in a later slide, a $700,000 grant to assist with that work, which will be commencing very shortly. That option then triggers the balance of that 170 acres for the city and county to buy, which has to be bought by 2021 per the option agreement. The total price tag of that balance of that land is $3.8 million, which we would split 50-50 with the county. So the math is our $1.9 million would be used to buy that property with the bond funds of $4.45 million. Now granted, if we were able to sell the property to a developer or to a business between now and then, certainly we would recoup those dollars and not have to pay that full balance on the option. Any questions on that so far? Okay, so grant funding. So our $40 million in bond funds, as Mr. Wood opened the remarks, we have leveraged those funds as the matching funds for grants that we've received. And those grants, right now, they're North Carolina grants. We've leveraged that to receive $15.5 million in grant funds for the bond projects. And you see those two listed below. We received $11.3 million for City Walk, $3.5 million for Old Lenore Road, and $700,000 for Park 1764 today. The City Walk and Riverwalk projects, I went through those numbers fairly quickly, but basically the original cost estimates for City Walk and Riverwalk, those estimates were $23.6 million. Now the revised cost estimates for both of those projects total $23.9 million. Those two combined with the gateway at Highway 70 and 321, as well as the estimated amounts for the remaining projects, are within the total grant and bond funds that we have secured. We also received a $3.5 million grant with an 80-20 match, so we received $2.8 million in new money outside the bond program, but it's applicable to this conversation. So what this is a grant to enhance and or be at the table for design for the new 321 bridge spans that come from Caldwell County. That design will occur and be done by NCDOT, and the grant we received enables us to put our 2 cents, actually $700,000, into the design of that bridge so that we can incorporate elements of Riverwalk, elements of other amenities we have on the city. What do we want that bridge to look like rather than just a ugly gray, I guess DOT's not in the room, an ugly gray bridge that DOT might design. So that grant, I'm sorry.
Would we be able to tie in then, if we use this iconic bridge look, to have that same look so it ties all together?
Absolutely. Wouldn't it be cool if you could put some of those elements that are incorporated in Riverwalk on that bridge coming from Caldwell County into Hickory? Yes, ma'am. That would be a great idea. Yes, sir.
Would we have the opportunity to use some of that grant money to update the pedestrian bridge that we're going to accept from the state?
No, sir. That grant fund is specific to the 2 new bridge spans only.
Okay.
The north and southbound bridge.
And that's a great point and question, because that is true with all of these grants. They are tied to specific elements within each one of the bond projects, and they can't typically be repurposed for something else. So that's a good point to make.
Okay.
Here's some detail on that. Again, I mentioned a $3.5 million grant. It's 80-20, so the city's share would be $700,000 to receive that grant. We have advertised an RFQ to get a design team so that we can select those enhancements. What do we want that to look like? We need a designer to help us. Or is it the elements that Ms. Patton mentioned? Are there other elements that would be applicable to that design? And then we provide those drawings to NCDOT so that they can incorporate into their overall design. They would then go out for bids with that project, and then they would start the construction on that. Now, granted, that project is a little bit behind from when we thought it was, because they still haven't finalized the whole 321 expansion, the road, I guess, going into Caldwell County. So hopefully they'll do that soon so that we can sit down with them and discuss the design of the bridge. So I mentioned that because the bottom bullet is important. That $700,000 has to come from somewhere. I opened in one of my earlier slides, Gateway 5 was a gateway not in our bond package, but it was a gateway that the Inspiring Spaces Plan had identified. That was that particular area, that gateway into the city from Caldwell County was identified as Gateway 5. It's not funded, but it was identified. Staff feels that that $700,000 should come from the original $40 million bond projects in light of the fact that we've got grant funds, and that we use those dollars as, in essence, another gateway into the city and tie into Riverwalk. So what you'll see on this slide after this, I'll show you how all those dollars work, but that's what our recommendation is. Let me briefly mention Tiger Grant. In fact, that application went off yesterday. It's our third try. Third try is the charm, we hope.
Would you explain what that Tiger Grant?
Yeah, so the Tiger Grant, I didn't put all the acronym. Transportation Recovery and Revitalization. That's what it stands for. It's an acronym. It is a federal grant. There is a $5 million minimum for those grants. It used to be $10 million. So we think we have certainly a good shot at this. We made it further last year than the year before, and certainly we hope this year will be the charm. But that is a federal grant that is administered to us that we would receive, and what's in that particular grant package for this year are the following projects. The Lenoir Boulevard streetscape, the Book Walk, thank you Mr. Gass, which connects Patrick Beaver to the Ridgeview Libraries, the 9th Street Northwest streetscape, which is the South Connection. The first and the third, the Book Walk is not in our original package, $40 million, but the Lenoir Boulevard is, the South Connection is. The next one, the Old Lenoir Road streetscape, is also in our package, and the North Connection, which is the 3rd Avenue Drive streetscape. Those 4 projects are currently on our list of projects in our $40 million. So we have asked for those, or included those, in our Tiger Grant application. Mr. Zagaroli mentioned the Highway 321 pedestrian bridge. So we have asked NCDOT to leave the northbound US 321 bridge, the existing one, in place for us to potentially use as a pedestrian bridge to go from, Burke Catawba County into Caldwell County. They have generally agreed to that. Certainly they save money by not having to tear that bridge down. They would tear down the southbound bridge and build the 2 new spans and leave the existing northbound bridge the same. We have applied in the Tiger Grant for a grant to help with those improvements that Mr. Zagaroli, you were asking about.
Thank you.
So that is in the Tiger Grant package. And then the final project in that Tiger Grant is for a downtown parking deck. I mentioned we've got various, we feel a lot better about the application. One reason is we have now connected another county in our project. So if you go back, let me just do that. I did this briefly to start out with, right here. So now if we were to secure the Tiger Grant, let me say it a different way. Based on the projects that we've identified and the funding that we have, you can go from Lenoir Boulevard and I-40 north, cross Tate Boulevard, all the way to Lenoir University. You can go west, get on the South Connection, which is green, to Old Lenoir Road, as I mentioned before, hit the North Connection, go to Riverwalk, and you can go all the way up to Rotary Geithner Park in one fell swoop if we do these projects and the Tiger Grant comes for us. So my point in that, we got extra points, I'll call them, for establishing that regional connectivity. And we think that certainly is a plus to our application. So that's there. The total new request of federal dollars is $9.74 million. So again, it has to be over 5. But it's slightly under 10, which we think makes it a little attractive, so we're not spending too much of the federal government's money. And we are expecting announcement in January or February of next year. The political climate has changed in Washington, and that certainly has not hurt our application. We think it has helped us. We also have a local hero in the county that I think we want to reach out. It's been on the news with FEMA for the last few months, and hopefully we can tap into that resource so that he can get our project in front of the folks that make the decisions. This is how it breaks down on a spreadsheet. Obviously, the components of that grant are on the left-hand side. The total costs of those projects are a little over $20 million, but we're utilizing a grant that we already have received. That's the Old Lenore Road grant that we received. We would have a local match of $880,000, which would be the city share, as well as the local match for the Tiger grant itself, which we'd be using bond funds. So that ends up being $9.74 million in Tiger funds that we could receive from the federal government. So the final current bond program financial status. The projects that we currently have in the $40 million are down the left-hand side, and those were the original amounts that you saw earlier. The second column of numbers is the updated costs. The grant funds that we know about are listed. Here's the City Walk grant, here's the Old Lenore grant, here's the Park 1764 grant. That totals the $15.5 million I was mentioning. Here's the Riverwalk grant that we will be applying through the Western Piedmont Council of Government. And here are the projects that we have added in the Tiger grant application, resulting in a proposed bond funds of a little over $38.5 million of our $40 million in total allocation. So at this point, obviously with 60% design with City Walk and almost 30% with Riverwalk, we have unallocated bond funds of $1.4 million. I'll also add the cost for the 321 bridge enhancement, again, that is outside the bond project, but that local match has been included in the spreadsheet for your consideration. Our next steps to finalize the projects, both the timing and the amount. Obviously, we've not done the other streetscapes or the gateway, so those obviously will be coming in the future. We will finish design of City Walk, Riverwalk, and the gateway at 321 and 70. Next year, we envision awarding the construction contracts, hopefully for all three of those projects. And sometime in the summer or fall of next year, I would recommend that we issue our first bond issuance of approximately $25 million, which would include the One Gateway, the City Walk, and the Riverwalk projects. It also reimburses the city's general fund for bond project expenses as well as design costs that have already been incurred that the city has paid for. And then we would envision an incremental property tax increase or increases to pay for that $40 million as those projects come online. We're still a little early in the process to determine what that tax increase might look like. Would it be July 1st of next year or July 1st of 2019? We need to get a little further down the road before I can give you that recommendation. And that's my presentation. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
The Lackey project is still coming along, and I believe they're planning fall of next year also.
Don't have a timing for that, but I know they have 3 months left for their design team to get to construction drawings. But I've not heard an update as to when that will be complete, when the design will be complete. Certainly, we'd like to time their design. Of course, we have a component of that project, but we'd certainly like to time that design to our Riverwalk so that we could dovetail their project and the Riverwalk project together, especially if we have this, I think I heard, ADA accessible path up to the parking lot there where the Lackey project would be.
So this is very involved, particularly with the grants, and it's imperative that we stay on budget. And again, the cost estimates, as we know them today, are within budget. You've got a $1.4 million cushion on a $55 million bond program, and potentially more with grant money.
3% is what I calculated that at.
But
there's 20% in some of the lines.
Correct.
Yes.
There's some contingency built in. This hurricane season did not help us with construction costs. Hopefully some of that will work itself out by next summer. But it is imperative that we stay within these numbers. And again, this is Mr. Lell mentioned the policy level decision. This is absolutely policy level decision for city council in determining the money to be spent. This is staff's recommendation on what those numbers should be, but we're asking for direction from city council that the bond program stay within these numbers.
And what's the total amount of time we had to draw down from the bond?
You've got 7 years. Initially, you can get a 3-year extension, so we're 3 years in, so we have 7 years left.
Oh, okay.
Max.
I would certainly want to stay within the proposed budget and keep that little cushion for sure. So do we need to motion to?
If you want to put that in motion, we'll second, then we'll discuss.
Yeah, okay, I would like to make a motion that we give direction to our bond commission that they, with their respective projects, keep within the budget proposed.
Yes, a second.
Been moved and seconded. Now we'll open it for discussion.
Just add to the extent that if we determine Riverwalk, or the bond commission looks at the, I think staff's going to have the designers react maybe to this new riparian rule in the ADA, sort of discuss that too. And if there's potential to still have that Riverwalk, but it comes in cheaper, that we not have to spend that money on
Correct,
it.
that doesn't violate, that's not an opposition
clear,
motion.
right,
That's,
right,
yeah, if it stays within budget, you've got that freedom within budget.
Within budget, yeah.
Either one would need,
Either one, within the budget.
Within budget, right,
either way.
yeah,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, it's imperative that we stay within the budget.
I think the citizens expect us to. We ask them to vote on that.
All right, other discussion? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The motion carries. Thank you.
Just want, again, to follow up, we will be working on a detailed schedule moving forward to keep us on track and moving in an efficient way to get to a point where we're turning dirt and finishing.
One quick question, all of this is still online daily, is it not? It's updated, maybe not daily, but it's where the public can see it, as we had discussed from the very beginning. Is that still?
The plan would be, correct me if I'm wrong, once we have subcommittee review the 60% and the 30% design drawings, we would put those designs on the website and printouts in City Hall if necessary. Yeah, we want to get a lot of pictures and let people know exactly what's out there. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So when we have these big projects, particularly City Walk and Riverwalk, I would think there would be some site furnishings that would be necessary. If it's benches, signage, of course, lighting's probably already been picked up. But do you know if do we need to have an allowance for that kind of? I mean, we're going to need trash receptacles.
With City Walk, that's all been included in that $18.8 million.
Okay, so yes, the site.
There's also an allowance in there just to relocate utility poles. I'm thinking $500,000 in there, I remember off the top of my head, for relocating utility poles.
Right.
Now, there maybe still need to be some water and sewer infrastructure that we want to do in conjunction with the project.
Right.
That would not be in that number, but
Right.
the utility pole relocation, I know those numbers specifically
I guess
are in there.
I'm just trying to think of, things that we haven't thought of, right, just to keep us.
And if this is all inclusive, this is design, all those amenities you
Yeah.
mentioned, contingency, utilities, construction inspection, this is a bond program for each one of these projects. Not just the construction costs themselves.
Yeah.
Are we going to work in some restroom facilities along the Riverwalk?
On the Lackey end, they're Geiger Park.
I mean, I was just thinking, we're going to have two there on the City Walk there. Of course, it's going to be more.
There's your first change order.
Yeah.
On City Walk, there are 3 restrooms actually in those numbers,
Okay.
in those plans. Riverwalk, there is not a restroom facility currently in those numbers.
Well, it was going to be in the pavilion, was it not? Or in that area, the Lackey
The Lackey.
complex?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there'll be
Yes,
one
sir.
there.
There will be one there, right?
Yes, sir,
But
there
there
will
won't be little porta-johns along the walk, right?
Can't answer that. I wouldn't think so.
There may be.
That's why I want it in the woods, Dave.
Okay.
And Mr. Lell's tree.
But I do think it's worth mentioning too, on the Riverwalk, an exciting piece that we did. We hadn't gotten a lot of discussion because we've been focusing on that path going down, but is that area at the, I'll give my directions, I guess it'd be at the western side. Yeah, right, well, yeah, the green space I'm talking about
Here.
before, yeah, right. That gives, there's opportunity there for public use and for,
Development.
yeah.
And that was discussed at one time about what were we going to do.
Yeah,
with that
we call it the
because-
P3 area.
Yeah, the P3.
Yeah.
The P3 area.
That's the change order, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's one sneak peek. Again, we don't have the details. That's what the designers will be discussing next week with the Riverwalk Subcommittee. So hopefully, they'll have grandiose plans for that, including a restroom, Mr. Seaver.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's one item we may need.
Further discussion? Mr. Wood, anything else we need? Mr. Miller, thank you, Mr. Rabb, Mr. Wood, all of the staff and all of the bond commission, thanks for your good work. You have more ahead, we do too, and so far so good. If there's no further business, we'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no, meeting is adjourned.